your first reflections on what the foreign minister tell, and maybe Professor Schneider?
Yeah.
Have you learned something new for yourself? Is it something different what you've seen on the ground?
I think there's a bit of a disconnect between the rhetoric here in Kiev and even the rhetoric in Milan in terms of implementation of the ceasefire and the reality on the ground, which is a fundamental disagreement about several basic issues, chiefly the border, both the border with Russia and the internal demarcation of this ceasefire line and the buffer zone. And I think that what we're seeing with the continued fighting around the airport and in places like Debaltseve is the manifestation of that disagreement, which is to say that the folks inside the separatist territories have a different idea about where that line should be.
And what is your impression on there? And, you know, like, where have been you the last time?
In eastern Ukraine?
Yeah.
Well,
maybe you would give me a feeling, what is that? And I also would tell that we would do our best that we would provide also with the video that people could see, because it's something different when you hear.
Sure. Well, Noah and I actually, we just recently returned from eastern Ukraine. We spent most of our time in Donetsk Oblast, but were able to also make it out to Lugansk, where things have changed rather dramatically since our last visit. We spent some time on both sides of the line, though. We were with both the Ukrainian soldiers in Debaltseve for a few days before going into Donetsk and Lugansk regions. You know, it's changed a little bit since the ceasefire, but not a whole lot. There's been a slowdown in terms of the number of shells falling, perhaps, but you know, there hasn't been any real ceasing of fire at all.
You know, when you came to Ukraine, you've stayed a lot in that area, in Donbass.
When I first came to Ukraine in 2010, I lived and worked in Artyomovsk in Donetsk Oblast, and I was working as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer then, but I worked in the region for more than 2 years.
How different is that? And like, you know, like, would you expect? I think nobody had ever.
It was a lot quieter then.
And besides that?
Well, besides that, you know, one of the most dramatic changes I've seen is at that time, while there was amongst my friends and colleagues, co-workers, a sense that the Donbass was different from the rest of Ukraine. You know, it had its own identity, not unlike other regions of Ukraine. I mean, yeah. But they did feel a little left out from the rest of the country. But nobody there ever really expressed interest in separating from Ukraine, joining Russia. There was no real sense of separatism. Whereas now you go there and you speak to people on the ground, and that seems to be what they want. At least the people who have left,
depending on the part of the country you are, on the part of the region you are. As we know, many people had fled the area because of the threat there.
So those who are still there
from Donbass as well. Yeah. For that time, the Donbass was left behind, run by but while the country was run by the president from Donetsk. Mm-hmm. And no, when your editors, we're interested a bit of the way the foreign press working. So what are the stories your editors would like to get from Ukraine? Because it's always the issue, what the publishing house wants and what is happening in the country.
Right. Well, I'm actually writing mostly these days for The Economist, and one of the things that we've been working hard to do and that we're hoping to produce in the coming weeks is a real account of the state, number one, of Ukraine's economy. Everyone talks about Ukraine's economy being in crisis, and we'd like to know exactly what that means. What effects is the war having both numerically, you know, in terms of the output in GDP and industrial production, but also in terms of people's lives.
And so far, when you know, always having this opportunity at this program, you also tell, like, what would be the most interesting for you untold stories, the stories you think are least covered but should be covered?
I mean, I think the humanitarian story is always a story that should be told, that needs to be told. I believe it was Mr. Schneider earlier who said, who was talking about the humanitarian catastrophe that will certainly come during winter. I mean, that's going to be a very, very big story. The humanitarian story is already a big story with more than 3,500 people killed in eastern Ukraine. I think it's only going to become more important as we move into winter and gas and heat become an issue.
Absolutely, and I think the other thing I'd add is a number of stories of individuals who have really made, on both sides of the line, frankly, enormous contributions, who have driven events in a way that I think is quite extraordinary, especially since we normally talk about these things in terms of geopolitics, in terms of bigger actors, but then you see, for example, volunteers on the Ukrainian side of the line who are really the lifeline for many of the soldiers out in eastern Ukraine. And similarly, inside the separatist-held territories, folks who are working to provide shelter for people in areas that are being shelled.
And there would be the election next week, when we will follow them. And what do you think? You know, like, is it over too much interest towards them, or vice versa? You know, like in the foreign media, because it's like, oh, there would be elections, so everything will change. I mean, we have a bit different feeling about that. That yeah, there would be elections. Okay, we're used to that.
Well, sure, it's your country's elections. I think obviously they're a big deal here in Ukraine. My editors are not as enthusiastic as the Ukrainian media is about parliamentary elections this year. But I think there are still interesting stories that can be told about the elections by foreign media. For example, some of the faces from Euromaidan joining the race, hoping to reform from the inside. I think that's an interesting story that is being told and could certainly be built on.
I think for the West, though, also these elections are seen as sort of a barometer for how much has changed inside Ukraine. So this is a way for a foreign audience to take stock of whether the ambitions of Maidan have really come to fruition. And are we seeing a change in the political structure? Are we seeing a change in terms of who is making decisions and how decisions are being made? And I think that's what people are seeing in this election. That's why there's so much interest towards something that seems relatively normal to you.